Of course, as we and other news outlets have talked about frequently, of course, it is the administration's policy that has caused this separation. But be that as it may, they're not reversing it. So it looks like there will have to be a legislative remedy here. Your colleague, Jerry Nadler of New York, has now introduced the House version of an already Senate-introduced bill to end family separation at the border. What are the chances of that, though, in a Republican-controlled Congress?
Well, I'd simply say that if my colleagues who are Republican would take the word partisan out of their vocabulary, even the word bipartisan, and use the term nonpartisan, if they would listen to the cries of the children on the audio that we all have been listening to for at least 48 hours, then they would take up Mr. Nadler's bill, which I support and co-sponsored, to ensure that we get the problem fixed immediately. I think I can almost equate, except that the children's desperate plea, of which I have heard and seen in 2 days at the border on Father's Day and yesterday, if they would answer that call and that cry and that desperate conditions that these mothers and children and fathers are now subjected to, we could go on to have further discussions. His policies, and I mean the president, are similar to the provocative way that he has attempted to provoke our allies in trade wars, when the preferable approach would be to sit down. There are those of us who agree with something called fair trade, and that requires negotiation. But the negotiations of this White House and this administration are provocative insults and bomb throwing. In this instance, lives are in the way, and those lives happen to be 9-month-old Raja and 1-year-old Leah.
So, Congresswoman, what about the Republican Ted Cruz has said that he is going to be now introducing a version of this, of some kind of legislation to prevent family separation at the border as well? Would you then support his efforts?
Well, it's in the House and the Senate, and so you pass a bill in the House, Mr. Nadler's bill, which I support. We look at Mr. Senator Cruz's bill. Remember, I said nonpartisan, and if those two can come together immediately, we will have a solution. But the point is, if it's game playing, for example, I'm supporting more judges at the border. We're in the Southern District of 50,000 cases backlog. The administration, the Trump administration, has skewed what has been longstanding policy to allow those fleeing domestic violence and as well gang violence to at least have an opportunity for a hearing. There are two different standards, the asylum hearing, or you can say you have credible fear. And the one thing I want to say about this, I would assume that some Americans will be listening and viewing this and say, call the police. These individuals are coming from countries where the infrastructure of law enforcement is not like the United States. They don't have any relief. Do you think Gabby, who I met, spoke to for a period of time, would have fled the country at 8.5 months pregnant if she had not been told by the cartel, you owe us money, once you birth that baby, we're killing you?
I hear what you're saying, but it's clear from the president's rhetoric that he won't stop the policy of refugee family separation unless Democrats make other concessions on border security. You talked about negotiations and fair trade and how negotiation is the way forward. What concessions are you and Democrats willing to make to ensure families will no longer be separated?
You know, we've made many points of opportunity for engagement. We had a bill that was bipartisan in the House. That's the one that the moderates were attempting to get 218 votes. They were too short when their efforts were undemocratically thrown under the bus. But we had border security resources there, the same kind of resources and the same kind of language that had been passed in the past by the Homeland Security Committee in a bipartisan manner. We're prepared. There are barriers, Scarlett, already at the border. I've seen them. I've been on this committee, and I've traveled from San Diego all the way to Texas. There are people in Texas and other parts who don't want a wall. So we must engage with not only our constituents or fellow Americans, but we must also have the president be willing to look at, he's not experienced in this, he's not getting any help from Homeland Security, they're not experienced, to look at the barriers that the Border Patrol will say, this works. Right. Versus a wall. So I'm prepared to sit down as a member of Homeland Security, a member of the Judiciary Committee, to craft the kind of barrier proposals that meet with the neighbors and those on the border that engage back and forth, the Border Patrol agent, CBP. But is the president willing to do that, or is he just willing to throw stones at these people who are they are in fear of their life? And to this morning, in a tweet, he says that Democrats believe in these individuals infesting America. Do you think that's worthy of any negotiation?
Congresswoman, I know that you did 2 tours, one yesterday, one on Sunday. You also went to the processing center in McAllen. The same group that runs those facilities, Southwest Key, has also just signed a lease for a warehouse in Houston to house more kids, and I believe that's in your district. Is there any way you or others are trying to stop them from doing that at this point, or is it too late to do that?
Well, the values of my community, I'm a representative, and I have to represent my constituents. My local government is absolutely opposed to this facility coming into the city. No notice was given to me as a member of the United States Congress or to the local officials. I understand that they have just had a press conference in Houston expressing their opposition. I would hope that the good intentions of the owner, who I understand did not notify the city at all as to the intentions of the use. And by the way, the city had intended to try to help homeless adults who we have in our own town, to get them off of the hot summer streets. And now we understand that this is a potential of these children being snatched away from their families. This is not Houston. This is not these are not our values. These are not the values of our faith community. So right now, in representing my constituency, I would be very much opposed to this process going forward without the affirmation of my community, and all I've heard is outrage, and I have to stand with them on the outrage. And I can tell you the outrage is well placed, because your heart breaks like Laura Bush if you were down in the valley and saw what was happening to these children and mothers and fathers.